John Cramer and Ken Blake, and hopefully we'll generate some good discussion. We have 46, 47, 49 people signed up for this, so I won't be able to be calling on anyone individually, but we really want to encourage you to participate. So as John mentioned just a minute or so ago, he's looking for some ideas. We're going to present what our potential solutions are. We really want to be able to generate some discussion and to see, is this the right way for him? How can he solve his lead generation issue? So I'm actually just going to get started here now. So, all right. As I mentioned, this is the FocusKPI Analytics Leadership Forum. And really, this forum is a place for discussion. So we want to have people just raise your hand or shout out loud, ask questions, give comments. We really don't. This is not a regular webinar. It's not designed to be a presentation. It's designed to be an interactive experience that we can all learn from each other and collaborate and share our ideas. So if we actually, so yeah, that's the other thing I wanted to mention on this one too. So this is really, it's not a presentation, it's a brainstorming session. So if you think of this as a way to generate ideas, a way to brainstorm, I think that might help to kind of set the stage for what we are looking for and the participation level. The more we can get our members to talk to each other, the more I can step out of the picture, the more you don't fall asleep, and the more you get out of this. So definitely interact with each other, ask questions, and let's go for the brainstorm. So what is the FocusKPI Analytics Leadership Forum? Well, we have a group that's called the FocusKPI Analytics Leadership Community, and these forums are the meetings for that group. What we want here is we really want a safe space that we can share our business experiences and discuss them as a similar experience. So, you know, the business challenges that are in a CPG industry are very similar to those in a healthcare industry and energy industry and finance, if you go down and drill down deep enough. And so that's what we want to get at here. We want to get at the similarities. How are we the same? How can we help each other to overcome our business challenges? So what I'd like to do right now is, so part of this is about collaboration. So if you could actually, in the chat box, if you could put in, I'd like to use the chat box a couple of times during the presentation. But if right now, if you want to put in your LinkedIn information, if you're comfortable doing that, so that the other members know who you are and what you're about, and as you say things and they're interested, just copy and paste that, your address in the chat bar, and then people can reach out to you directly. Like I said, this is a place for collaboration, and we at FocusKPI don't necessarily need to be involved in everything. So if you share your LinkedIn, then people can ask you questions about your field specifically. So thank you for those who are putting in their LinkedIn. We appreciate that. And the other members do too, because they may have questions. If you're not, then please feel free to follow up with Carol or Lynn or myself, and let us know what your comfort level is. We might have other people, other members who come through us asking about you, and if that's the case, we'd like to know whether or not we can release your information. So just communicate with us, let us know, and we really want to facilitate that collaboration between all of the members. The other thing I'd like, if you can, so there's two things in the chat box I'd like to do. One of them is LinkedIn, and I see people doing that, and that's fantastic. And the second thing is, I'd like to know how many people are familiar with lead generation in their experience. When you have worked with analytics, have you dealt with lead generation? I want to know how familiar people are with our first topic, which is on this. So if you are familiar with lead generation, put a 1 in the chat box so we can kind of see how many people are familiar with what that means, how analytics supports lead generation, and the value that analytics can bring to lead generation. So LinkedIn, and then a 1 if you have any experience with lead generation, analytics for lead generation. Okay. So today's highlights, we have, like I said, we have 2 speakers, and I will introduce myself to start. I am Joseph Ogrodowczyk. It's Ogrodowczyk, 2 birds at the end, and the CZYK is a little chick. So that's the way to remember that. We have 2 really interesting speakers today. One, Jonathan Cramer. He's the VP of Marketing at Storylift, and he is the one that has the lead generation challenge. He and I will tag team to discuss his issue, his challenge, and I really encourage everyone to speak up and give an opinion about how we can solve his problem. We have certain opinions, and that's what I'll present. Certain methodologies we think will work. And I really wanted to use this presentation to go through that process. How do you choose a model? How do you choose a solution to an analytic solution to a problem? How do you know which one to do? Do you do a model? Do you do an ad hoc? So that's what we'll talk about in the first speaker. And the second speaker is Ken Blake. He's head of analytics at AMP Agency in Boston. He's going to be talking about enabling effective analytic activation. So long title, but really important when we think of how analytics organizes itself, whether in a single firm, whether a department in a corporation, and then how analytics markets itself. How does it go out? How does it interact with its clients? What's the best way to do that? So that's what we have on tap. And again, please interrupt, ask questions, raise your hand. LinkedIn should go in the chat box, and a 1 if you're familiar with lead generation. I haven't seen too many of those, so this should be a nice introduction for a lot of you. I'm going to pause here for the moment and see, do we have any questions? Does anybody want to ask any questions about what's going to happen today or in general? Okay, thank you. So we'll go on to the next slide. This is the intro slide. And John, I will hand this off to you now. You can tell us what is going on in your world. Thanks for coming.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Joe. Yes, my name is Jonathan Cramer, and so I run marketing for a very, very small company called Storylift here, which is out of Columbia, South Carolina. It's an interesting company that actually does, and the irony here is that what our company does, the expertise of our company is lead generation. And we have a patented technology that helps create and generate some of the most incredible leads for our clients, but unfortunately I can't use that technology for my personal challenge. So trust me, the irony is not lost on me, because every day I see how well our company performs with clients, and I'm like, I wish I could use that for my own challenge. So what Storylift does is basically helps for-profit colleges find candidates. But what we do is, and when I say for-profit colleges, some of you may not know the distinction. So the difference between for-profit and, say, a private university like Michigan State, University of New Hampshire, Harvard University. For-profit colleges tend to be trade schools. They're shorter programs. A lot of them have nursing programs. They can have shorter IT programs. So people who are looking for shorter training programs that aren't going to go back for 4 years, they might go to DeVry, Lincoln Tech, and there are some community colleges that fall into this category, large community colleges in New York, California, Texas. So a lot of times their challenge is they're looking to fill their spots. So it's not like these state schools and private universities that get thousands and thousands of applications where they have to turn them down. A lot of these schools are actually trying to fill their spots. It's run like a business. Some of them are family run, some of them are run by a corporation, and I'll get into that in a second, hence the challenge. So what we do is we have a targeting technology that allows us to use our analytics and demographic information, not personal information, from people's social media activity on Facebook, Instagram, and we're able to target possible students who've not even started looking yet. So most schools you can do paid search, you can advertise on all these different platforms. That's fine, but we're actually able to identify high probability audiences that haven't even started looking yet. So that's the key differentiator. Not many people do that. There are gigantic marketing firms who specialize in just education, just schools. who might do the entire process from print media to this and that. No, we can help schools who have, say, a nursing program. They got 100 spots to fill every 6 weeks. We can help them by running a series of ads and content that suggests the idea of going back to school. Like, wouldn't it be great to go back to school? And our campaigns are unbranded. This is very important. So they don't have the name of the school. It's suggesting that idea. Almost the principle of, you know, how Amazon can figure out based on your activity what you might not have even started searching for yet, but they can sort of use analytics to decide what you might be interested in buying. It's that sort of idea. So imagine demographic of a young single mother who works in a restaurant, and we can maybe glean from that sort of demographic what their behavior is and what their affinities and attributes are, and we can start suggesting ads, maybe become a nurse, maybe become go back to a trade school, that sort of thing. So it's extremely successful, and as I mentioned, not many people do it. However, my challenge is finding the decision makers at these schools, and that means the VP of marketing. It could be the VP of enrollment, the dean of enrollment. It could be campus president. So I've been focusing on LinkedIn, and the reason why I can't use our technology is actually because I sort of know the job title. I know the people I'm looking for. There's a finite amount. There's only a few, maybe about 500 for-profit schools in the United States, and they are run, some of them like a corporation, some at the campus level. Some of them have different campuses and schools under their brand, so it could be upwards of 1,200 schools. So here's the challenge, as I mentioned. So sometimes it's the decision for employing an enrollment technology like ours could be made at a campus location level. So say you have a large campus in, say, Jersey City, New Jersey. The campus president might be in charge of, that expenditure, that budget for using enrollment technology. It could be dean of enrollment at that campus, or it could be VP of marketing, could be the chief marketing officer if it's run like a corporation. So this has been a challenge for me because I'm just a one-man sales and marketing. So I really have to figure out how to focus my energy and time and what little budget I have. And a lot of that budget goes to the actual marketing content, which is sort of my background. But so I've been focusing on cold email campaigns using an app called Cliently. I'm using LinkedIn as my primary source, and LinkedIn has actually led to every one of my sales calls that I've booked has been from LinkedIn, and only one has been from cold email, and that's of thousands of emails across multiple campaigns, about 700 or 800 contacts over the last 9 months. So LinkedIn has really been by far the most successful, and I just started 2 months ago using a call scheduling service, and what they do is I provide them with a lead list. They actually make cold calls, and they don't pitch. They just try to get a scheduled call with me, and one of the person on my team will sometimes jump on the call. So the sales process for us is very, very simple. It's only 1 or 2 calls. Like if I can just book that one call with the decision maker, we know in 20 minutes we can get an idea of asking them questions, and we can put together a lead projection based on analytics within a day or two. And from there, if they like that, we may have one more call, or we pitch a full proposal. So that's fairly simple. We're not talking about a prolonged, complicated sales funnel here. It's really just let's get them on the phone and we can determine if it's a good match. But back to the challenge of finding these sales leaders, it's tough to determine if the schools run like a corporation, if it's at the campus level. And that's why I need to find as much data as I can on determining that person. Joe, let me know if I'm running over time here. But so I have looked into, Zoom Info and these very expensive data services, data aggregates, what have you. Dun & Bradstreet does licensed lists. We really want to avoid using lists, but those are a bit out of my budget. Zoom Info, their lowest plan I think is $12,000 a year, and then the one with hierarchies, which is what I would need, that you're talking around $20,000 a year, and I just don't. That's almost my entire budget for the entire year. So I need to find a way, at least to approach this, have some rules or some methodology to approaching this, as now I'm kind of getting a sixth sense, a gut feeling. But how do I focus my very, limited resources, so to speak? And what I would do is, with better direction, I would focus more of that on LinkedIn. I am automating a lot of campaigns, and I've connected with a lot of these people. And I'm using my call scheduling service to actually make calls. They make 300 calls a month, and some months 0 calls booked. So that's an incredibly low conversion rate. The quality of the lists, they tell me, are pretty good. They're able to verify that these people exist. Sometimes they get more information by talking to people more junior or gatekeepers. And so a lot of times they're able to verify some of this information, but still they don't even know. Sometimes we get this person on a call and they don't even know who makes these decisions. So Joe and I have discussed a few ideas, and there's probably no silver bullet, and that's okay. But I'd like to get your feedback, as long as you guys understand that you can't just raise your hand and say, oh, go with Zoom Info. It's only $20,000 a year and they've got the hierarchies and that should help you. Unfortunately, that's not in my budget. So I'm trying to find a way to focus primarily on LinkedIn. I'll use the ancillary periphery services such as cold email. But I would like to focus really on LinkedIn. I think that's got the most data. It's got the most updated as far as profiles. And then from there, I would feed that to my call scheduling service, because they can place 300 calls a month, and from then get them on the phone. So the ultimate goal is to get them to show up to a scheduled call with me.
Cool.
I don't know if that was, did I lose everybody?
No, John, I think that's perfect. I think that's the right way to do it, because so if we head on to the next slide here. So really what John is looking for is he's looking to prioritize his leads. How does he prioritize his sales leads? He knows, I mean, he can go to these schools, he can get a list of the people, he can list of the titles, but his time is valuable. So how does he do that? Where are the people that he wants to go for? So what I wanted to do in prior case studies, we've shown you what the results were. But in this particular case, I really want to go through the process of discussing what the appropriate model is. I know we have some data scientists here. I really hope you guys kind of give a shout out for what you think this should be. Once we get to the next slide, I'll pause it, and hopefully that can be our discussion point for coming off of that. But so really the question then that we had, that we're working on FocusKPI with John, is how do we do this? How do we give him some guidance on where he needs to go, on where he should spend his time? And so
Joe,
really,
can I mention,
yep,
sorry, just one thing I didn't mention was, and this will help you in your next frame, is I've identified about 50 different job titles that could be possible decision makers. So that adds to the complexity. See, so if you just gave me, if it was VP level, we're fine. So I just wanted to mention that, Joe, so people understand that the variation of job titles adds another layer of complexity to it. So that will help.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll pause here and see, for those who had lead generation experience, can you put a 1 in the chat box? I'd like to know kind of where people are at with this. Oh, all right, cool. So we do have some people that have dealt with lead generation. Yeah, we have some data scientists. Let's put some 1s for the data scientists in there, because I know that some of you have also had experience with this. I'm gonna call out Jen Fu, because I know, Jen Fu, you worked on my team at Staples, and we did lead generation for theirs. So I know that you're in on this here. All right, so we got some people. So let's go to the next slide here. So what do we have in front of us? Binary classification. What does that mean? Well, if you think about leads are either converted or not converted. That's it. John either gets a phone call or he doesn't get a phone call. So really when we think about analytics, what we want to find is those people who are going to give him a phone call. We want the phone call for him. And so how do we find the highest probability of people who will take phone calls? We came up with 3 sort of general ways. The first way is a logistic model. This really it's a regression, and it assigns a probability to each person at each school for each title. And it will say, yep, these people are 80% likely, and these people are 50% likely. And then we can rank them. And I'll get back to the output in a moment. The second way is a random forest or a decision tree, and this is really classification. It does assign probabilities, but it assigns probabilities to groups, and it's not a regression. It's not the same type of model. It just classifies with certain variables. So in other words, school size. Well, if the school size is higher, then that might be more likely to give John a phone call, or if they're lower, or if they're in the middle. And so trying to find those little pockets where school size and school type and geographic location, all those variables may play a role, that would be a random forest or decision tree. And then the third way that we could do this would be an SVM, which is called a support vector machine. And this is really a type of machine learning algorithm that kind of goes through the data and it classifies and uses regression. It's kind of a combination of the both if you think of AI. So I want to stop here. And for those of you who've said that you're familiar with sales lead generation, I really hope you're comfortable speaking, because I would like to hear from you your feelings for these model types. So if you don't mind putting yourself off mute and speaking up, I think that would be really terrific to get your input.
Can I add something?
Absolutely, Vivek. And then William, yeah. I'll let you. I'll let John answer your question. So go ahead, Vivek.
So a binary classification, I think, would be a good approach with a right kind of a metric.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to look at we want to look at what we want to reduce, either the false positives or the false negatives. I think in this case, it would be the false negatives. So we want we do not want, so for example, if we predict that this customer's call is not being converted and it actually converts, we do not want to miss on those customers. Have I framed it right?
Yes, that's absolutely. I mean, we would rather have, so John doesn't want to waste his time. So we don't want to give him more. We don't want to give him false positives.
Yeah. I mean the false negatives. Yeah. So for example, if we predict this customer is actually not being converted, but what if he has been actually converted, the call has been converted, but we are missing on those customers?
Exactly. So yeah, we do want to, we definitely want to be aware of that in our hypothesis testing for the models. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So right kind of a metric would add more value to this model.
Yes.
Deciding on a right kind of a metric.
Exactly. And I think that does bring up a point. So when you think about what models to use and how to approach this, your measurement plays a really big role. That's a great point, Vivek. Whether you look at false positives or false negatives and how you incorporate those will affect how you build your model. So I'm going to go on and John, do you see William's question there about what do we know about the leads that succeeded?
Yes. What do we, that's an interesting question. There've been so few. I would say liberally that we've had a little under 30 calls in the last sort of 10 months. And that some of that was a bit luck and most of that was LinkedIn. So if you want to know what I know, I would say the title is it would be director and above. So the lowest, I guess, title ranking decision maker we had was from the College of Charleston, and his title was director. Everything else has been sort of VP and above, if that helps. And they've been from different schools from around the country. One or two were smaller type schools. We're trying to get the larger type schools. So I can only really tell you that off the top of my head as far as, we had a couple junior that we spoke with them, but they were too low they were too junior to make a decision or be able to identify even who the decision maker was. So I'd say director level and above as far as title from what I could determine for the schools who had responded to my messaging.
Cool. John, I did that on purpose because you're a marketer. You think like a marketer. That's what you know about your data set. What you just said is what you know. And that's very typical for marketers. You don't analyze your data. You don't know exactly what are the properties of these. So William, from an analytics standpoint, we have just received the data. We haven't analyzed that data yet to determine what those markers are. We're still consolidating the data that we got from John. But yeah, that's one of the things that we need to do is we need to understand what do we know about these leads? Do an EDA on the leads that were successful. Jerry, I'll answer your question next. How big is the sample size? We have about 1,500 observations, and about 20 of those were converted. Do we also have the LinkedIn profile? William, what do you mean for this? The LinkedIn profile of the people who were successful or of the schools. Do you mind going off mute and saying it, or you can write it in the chat?
Yes, I am referring to successful leads, their profiles, may tell you more about who this person is, what they think their job is in their professional career. And that may be the key words in there that you want to search.
I like that idea. I like that idea a lot. We had not thought of that. Jinfu, I know you're here. I think that's a really good idea, and we should think about how to consider that. Kendrick, you had a question. You said, in terms of our experience as a marketer, do you have a guess of a baseline conversion rate? John, you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, for baseline conversion rate, I can only answer for, I mean, LinkedIn messaging is fairly new, and I don't know if it follows the traditional rules that I'm used to. For cold calling and cold emailing, I'm happy with the 1 conversion rate. I mean, anything above 1 is wonderful. And I haven't seen, email's been less than that, and the cold calling has been around 1%, up to 3% some months, and then some months 0.
Okay, all right, so this slide here is the data that we have received from John so far. We have basically 4 different data sections. And again, for those of you who've been involved in this, or even for those of you who haven't, please comment on this data. It's the more data, of course, the more data we can get, the better, hopefully, guidance that we can give John. So the first thing we have is a list of his target schools. These are all the schools that are kind of, he said there was, 500 for-profit schools. Is that what it was, 500, John?
Yeah, that's a rough number, but like I said, some of those schools own other schools, so it's very, very difficult. The number's changing, they're going out of business, there's renaming, so that's a safe estimate.
So we received from John a target schools file. On that file is like name, address, and other descriptions about each of the schools. Then he gave us a single file with just a bunch of job titles, as he's mentioned some of those: director, associate director, president, VP, on and on. And I think there's about 50 of those or something. It's a good list. And then we received from him also his LinkedIn contacts, and this is our universe. This is the people that he's connected with on LinkedIn. So this is really, from here are the ones we say, okay, this is where the leads come from, and this is, these are the converted leads, and this is our whole universe. And then lastly, we're trying to bring in, so we have each school, and each school has an address associated with, so therefore we have a zip code. So what that means then is that, and as John said, these are brick and mortar schools. So if these are brick and mortar schools, then a zip code is probably relevant, because we're not talking online. If I live in Massachusetts, I'm not going to be applying to a school in California. So therefore, I'm going to be going close to where I live, and therefore the census data at the zip code level and the Department of Education level, about the Department of Education data about schools and geographic locations, might be helpful in this instance. So what I want to just pause here is to say that sometimes, like, I don't think we have enough data from John, period. I think it's too small. It's a very small data set. But maybe if we append some of this data, we might be able to tease out some business rules. And that's really what we're going for in this instance. We're going for business rules. Now, I want to stop here and talk about data. So again, if you could either unmute yourself or write in the chat. I'm going to call out Yading. You said that you had dealt with lead data before. If you want to write something about that in the chat, I'd be interested to know your view on the data that we have, or anyone else, just to see is this reasonable? Is this something that we think really would work? And just type it into the chat, or please feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me. Any comments at this point? Okay, let's move on to the next slide then. As I said, we talked about business rules. There we go. Okay, yes. John, you want to take the question? Yating asked if we're only targeting schools in nearby states.
No, so I want to clarify, it might not have been clear earlier. So we're targeting schools all around the country. what we're trying to do is target the decision makers from an administrative component. So we don't really care about the students, because some of these schools some of them have campuses all over the country. We want to find the administrative center. Is that decision maker near one of those campuses out in California, or is that person in Chicago where the head office is, where the corporation is run? So that's been sort of the challenge too. So yeah, it's sort of all over the place. We just want to find, I think that, as Joe mentioned, having that location data can be helpful, because assuming the largest administrative offices will house perhaps the higher ranking, higher level executives.
And yeah, and so when we bring in this census data in the Department of Education data, we need to be very careful in the assumptions that we're making, because John is looking for the decision makers, and that data might be about the schools and the surrounding and the students. So there might be a disconnect, in which this is why we're looking for business rules and not a direct correlation, because some of the places may have an administrative office that's not near the main campus. So census data might not be that helpful in that instance. But if generally a lot of those, especially for the larger schools, have the administrative office that's near their largest campus, then you can see the merging of the Department of Ed data with the census data and how that can help John. So I don't know that these will be helpful. I'm hoping that there's some correlation between, say, school size and administrative and location, but that might not be the case. And we just have to move on from there. Our last slide. Oh, these are just areas of, I mentioned we wanted business schools. And all right, hold on, I got distracted by things. Emailing methods, have you tried the greatest time? Oh, yes, okay, so John, have you done anything with timing optimization of your email campaigns? That's what the question is. And then I'll get on to our business rules.
That's a great question. I really haven't, because these schools have pretty much an ongoing enrollment 24/7 all year round. So they're constantly they don't really, some of them may have timed some of their programs with traditional semesters, so to speak. But for the most part, some of these trade schools have programs that are only 8 to 12 weeks. I've seen as short as 8 weeks, but usually 12 is the lowest. So they're constantly enrolling, whether it's the summer, whether it's Christmas, the holiday season. So I haven't really focused on doing that timing. If I was working with perhaps traditional schools, state universities, private schools, then I think that might be a factor. But considering the calls that I've had, and even our current clients, it's 24/7, 365 days a year. It has really not been from what we've seen. I mean, if I looked at our clients, which I don't work directly with them, they might have certain pockets during the year, but for the most part, they're always looking. They're constantly, as far as the online lead generation. Events may be a different thing, but since I don't work on any of the events, so yeah, it could be a factor, but so far, just based on what I know and what our clients' behavior is, doesn't seem to be a key deciding factor.
Cool. Thank you, John. All right. So again, the business rules that we're trying to give to John might have to deal with title of the target, might have to deal with school size or school location, and might have to deal with some of the publicly available data. We're not certain on this yet, but these are the things that we're bringing in. And I really appreciate all your suggestions. I like that LinkedIn. I want to see how we can probably incorporate that. And if you do have any other suggestions or comments, please let me know, because we're exploring this, and we want to help John as much as possible here. So thank you. And thank you, John, for coming and being brave and telling us what your problems are.
My pleasure. I love talking about my problems.
Thank you. All right. If we move on, our next speaker is, all right. So Ken Blake will be up next. I'll pass it over to him in just a sec. But after that, we will follow up with an announcement section. We have a couple of job opportunities I want to let you know about. And I'll say more at the time. So at this point, Ken, I'm going to hand it over to you, and go ahead.
All right. So first, let me try to share my screen. Let me just make sure this works. Okay. Can you see this?
Yep, perfect.
Fantastic. All right. So, Joe, you made the comment earlier that the title was kind of long, which I originally had as effective analytic activation. So I'm happy to announce I've taken one letter off this, and it is now holistic analytic activation. So we're driving efficiency with every step of this presentation. So happy to be here today. Thanks everyone for joining late in a Friday afternoon. Like Joe said, I'm the head of analytics for AMP Agency. I'm relatively new to the organization. In the past, I've led analytics organizations both on the agency side as well as with Staples on the corporate side. So what I'm going to talk about today is this concept of holistic analytic activation. I'll talk about how I'm defining that, why it's important, and how to achieve it, and some of the challenges with achieving it, some of the obstacles that you may run into. So I'll preface this by saying, I know we have a pretty broad group on the call. I'm assuming most of you are in some type of an analytics role, but based on my participation in some other discussions with this forum, there's probably a few of you that may not be specifically within an analytics role, but I assume you were at least supported by an analytics practice in some way, whether within your organization or maybe with a partner agency like FocusKPI. So some of what I'm going to talk about is about how to structure an analytics team in an appropriate way, the different skill sets that we need. For those of you who are not in analytics, I still think this will be relevant to you in that you're supported by these teams. So if you're having challenges with getting what you need from your analytic partners, hopefully some of the content here can help you drive some of those conversations with analytic leaders that support you to make sure that you get what you need in the long term. So hopefully there's a little bit of something for everybody, and I look forward to walking through with this with you. There'll be a couple checkpoints where I'll ask for some feedback or thoughts. But if anything comes up in the meantime, in the chat screen, Joe, please let me know and I'll be happy to answer that. So we'll talk about holistic analytic activation first. What is it? What does it look like when it's done well? And maybe just as importantly, what does it look like when it's done poorly? In order to achieve holistic analytic activation, what are the key requirements? Talk about team structure. We'll talk about the critical relationship between analytics and the business that analytics is supporting and what that engagement process looks like. And then we'll talk a little bit about skill sets, and I want to touch on what I'm calling the marketing scientist role, which I'll describe what that means when we get to it. And then we'll finish off by talking through some common pitfalls and how to avoid them. All right, so in its basic form, if you think about the initiative process and the different phases of an initiative process, we've got discovery, strategy development, implementation, and measurement. And those are very general terms, but in general, any type of initiative is going to encompass some form of this. So when I say holistic analytic activation, how I'm defining that is data analysis and tools are driving decisions within each phase of these initiatives, and also across all initiatives, right? Particularly key initiatives. So why that's important, you see the interlinkage between the four phases here. They're all self-reliant. They're all reliant on each other. None of them are self-reliant. So if you fail in one, you're going to impact the others. So if you don't do proper discovery, you're not going to develop a proper strategy. You may fall down on the implementation side because you haven't considered the operational components. And from a measurement standpoint, you may be measuring something that's not even a core business objective. So the need for discovery to go well and for analytic involvement, I think, is an obvious one. If you inform a strategy poorly, it's not informed by data and analytics, very difficult to salvage that through good implementation. If it's a bad strategy up front, no matter how well you implement, it's not going to turn out well in the long run. And even if you have strong discovery and strong strategy, if you implement it poorly, you can't offset weak implementation with a strong strategy. And then measurement, which all of us are very familiar with, if that's not done well, that really limits the ability to improve even a well-informed strategy. So why is it difficult to achieve this? And I want to get your thoughts on this as we move forward. But the four areas that I see the most often is either a lack of discipline, and that could be within our analytic teams, or it could be across the organization where we're rushing to get things done. So we try to figure out which steps to skip, and good analysis tends to be a step that gets skipped pretty often, particularly early in the process of planning an initiative. It might be misaligned skill sets. So you might have the right functional skills within the analytics team, but they might not have the right, what I call emotional intelligence, which I'll touch on later, in order to truly engage with the rest of the organization properly. The engagement process between analytics and the business may be broken, it may just be unstructured, it may be incomplete. And then sporadic business immersion, which I'll touch on later, that's the whole idea of, for an analyst to do a good job, he or she really needs to understand the business. It's not enough to be mechanically and technically strong and have the ability to build a robust model. If you don't understand the ins and outs of the business, very difficult for an analyst to reach his or her potential in terms of their contribution to the project.
Hey, Ken, can I pause here for a moment for you?
Of course.
I want to bring up the similarities and the importance of what you're saying in terms of business development, because I know that we have, a lot of small businesses here too. And so, if you look at why it's difficult to achieve, lack of discipline and misaligned skill sets, and you think about that in terms of opportunity for your clients, this becomes a lot clearer on how this relates back to an analytics function or an analytics consulting company trying to do business development for its clients. How do we give value to our clients? We have to know these areas of our clients. We need to build a relationship so we understand, what their business is like. And these are going to be the problems that they have, and that's why they don't have a good analytics department. So just kind of tying it back to a broader perspective as well. So thank you, Ken.
Yeah, absolutely. What I always tell my teams is we will never be as educated about our client's business as the client will be. And if we are, that's probably a sign that the client has some issues they got to work through. But we need to get as close to as possible to that. We need to see ourselves as an extension of their team, whether it's the marketing team or the sales organization or the product organization. It doesn't really matter. It depends on who we're supporting. But the closest we can come to being an extension of the team, the better off we'll be, regardless of whether you're within an organization or with a smaller practice or with a larger agency. All right, so I touched on this before. So discovery, strategy, implementation, measurement. Let's think of that as a standard life cycle. Before we dig into some of the specifics around how analysts can support each area, at least my thoughts on some of the challenges that organizations have in supporting each stage of the cycle, let's throw out some ideas, maybe one or two for each of these around how do you all think that data analysis can help the business at each stage of this continuum of this life cycle? Maybe we start with discovery. What can be done up front in discovery from an analytics standpoint to make sure that's a complete process?
Ken, I'll throw one out here. I'll get the ball rolling, because I know that a lot of times the not understanding what the root cause of your problems are is a really big issue. So you might know you have problems, but you don't know exactly what's going on, what causes it, what are the variables that contribute to that. So in this instance, I would say an exploratory data analysis and just looking at the database. And I remember when you and I worked together, like that was a big component. We always wanted to go there. We wanted to go into that area where we had a team that was able to dig into the data and find anomalies, to really bring those issues to light. So that I would put that down for discovery.
Yeah, so it's almost the key there is making sure we're starting off in a good spot. It's in some ways you're better off making mistakes at the end of this continuum than early, because if you make a mistake early or there's some gap in that, the example you gave, we're defining the business challenge incorrectly, nothing else is going to matter if we miss on that one, right? So I completely agree with that. Strategy development, implementation. I won't insist that we have one for each of these, but any thoughts on other areas where you've seen analytics add a lot of value to those phases of the continuum? And Joe, by the way, I cannot see the chat screen the way I have my screen set up. So if anything's popping up, just let me know. Thank you.
Cool.
Anything, Joe, or you want me to just to dig into this?
Yeah, let's dig into this. Well,
Hey, it's Friday at 4 o'clock. I don't expect everybody to be at their most chatty. I don't think most of us typically are at that point. But the real message I want to talk about here is if we assess our analytics organizations or what we're doing day to day, and this goes for whether you're an analytics leader or you're a brand new analyst in the world, or if you are a function that is supported by analytics. What I see most often, and these are in order from left to right, partly because that's the order they tend to be executed, but it also tends to be inversely related to when analytics is typically brought in. And the challenge I see most often is analytics is seen as the people that measure the strategy that I implemented, right? So they may not be brought in, we may not be brought in early in the process, and then strategy's been developed, they start executing campaigns or some overarching initiative, and then they realize, all right, we don't know exactly how we're going to measure this. Let's bring in the analytics people, and they can help us with that. Well, the problem is, yeah, it's useful for analytics to be involved at that point, but we haven't gotten involved earlier in the process. So we're really just measuring something that may not have been informed by data and insight. So for those of you who are not Seinfeld fans, you may not love these next few slides, but you're just going to have to deal with it because it's probably still my favorite show of all time. So we're going to have the Seinfeld cast help us figure out whether these approaches are good. So in this scenario, analytics is primarily focused on measurements. Let's see what George thinks. Nope. So George thinks this is the Lord of the Idiots approach to analytics and developing a strong strategy, because we've missed out on discovery, strategy development, and implementation. So getting a little better is, okay, now you have scenarios, and I think, Joe, you and I have worked together long enough, we've seen this a lot too, where some discovery was done, we didn't necessarily have visibility into it, a strategy was developed, we didn't necessarily have visibility into it, and then once implementation came in, there was a realization that we need either a testing plan or we need some predictive modeling, maybe we need some kind of a segmentation scheme, all good stuff and all important to the process, but again, it's coming in a little bit late to the game. So, Elaine's gonna say, nope, that's not good either. We've got to go to another approach. Getting a little better is now strategy development. So now analytics is brought in for developing hypotheses, for determining target audiences, for figuring out what kind of promotions or offers are gonna be most effective, maybe defining content based on segmentation. So we're getting a little better here. So Jerry's, not super thrilled with this, but he doesn't think it's a terrible idea. Then we've got the full picture, right? So discovery up front, and Joe, you touched on some of these earlier. You talked about the business objectives, and that's going to lead into some learning objectives. That's going to lead into an assessment of what insights currently exist and what gaps currently exist. What other kind of data mining do we need to do to fill some of those gaps? Whether it's with analysis of very detailed transactional customer data or customer engagement data. It might involve some customer research. It might involve some broader market research. But the whole idea behind this is before we get to strategy development, we've learned everything we can possibly learn at that phase. So while the strategy may not end up perfect, we at least know that that's informed by all the work that we did up front. So let's see if Cramer approves, and yes, he does. Giddy up. All right, so that's how I at least view the life cycle, and these are pretty basic phases, and I don't think anyone would look at this and say, oh yeah, of course I would include analytics at each stage. But we all know in practice, that's not necessarily how it happens. And I'll just throw out a couple obstacles that I've seen, but welcome to hear from everybody else as well. One of the biggest obstacles that I see with getting analytics involved early in the process as well as throughout the process is that everyone's in a hurry to get things done. right? So whether you're in an agency or an analytics service provider or within an organization, no one's looking for the slow way to do things, right? They've got revenue goals, they've got margin goals, and they want to get something out the door, and whether it's a campaign or some broader strategy. And there's not always a lot of awareness as to what it takes to do that properly. And I think we have to look at ourselves sometimes as analysts and say, and ask the question, are we outspoken enough to make that clear? That in order for us to add value, we not only need to be involved early, but there needs to be a sensible timeline associated with that so that we're truly informing the process and not just coming in to measure at the end and sort of save the day with some type of optimization strategy. You get us involved earlier, it's actually much quicker, right? And I'll touch on that, a little bit of that later, but that's one of the big obstacles that I look at, I see is lack of understanding as to how long it takes to truly inform a good strategy, and a lack of patience to wait for that to play out or to manifest itself. Any other thoughts on that, or what you guys have seen or ways you've overcome it?
And this is great. Gary Tao here. Joseph, hi. I think this is a great topic. Ken has described the challenges we see because we sometimes get involved in the later stage. There are multiple reasons, as you said. One is that everybody's busy. The company culture is one thing, and also the personality of analysts is another. Yeah. Because if we have self-reflection first, the analysts are generally problem solvers. They are not necessarily the best communicator or relationship builder, or let's say even the strategist. So some analysts even label themselves as developers. But whenever I hear that, I say, no, you are not a developer. You're not a programmer. You are not an analyst. You are a consultant, meaning you solve problems. And you happen to use this methodology or technique to solve the problem. And you have to communicate. You have to sell yourself, sell your capability all the time to other people. So I agree with Ken that you said, oh, we have to be vocal. We have to tell people. We have to really be brave and say, okay, wait a minute. Why don't you give me the entire flow of the question, the context, and don't just call me at the last step, right? So this is how we behave and reflect on ourselves. The other part is that we also have challenges in terms of getting the seat on the table in the upfront stage for discovery, because when the strategy was formulated, we were not even at the table. That's why improving the visibility and exposure of data analytics to a more established function is very critical. So that way you are at the table. You are not necessarily become an afterthought and say, oh yeah, why didn't we think about that? So that's another. The third one is also the organizational cultural kind of like a structure. If data analytics is part of, let's say, IT, or part of finance, or part of sales, or part of marketing, then you are still being perceived as a technical department or working group. You are not being perceived as, okay, you are here trying to help us shift the entire organization's culture in terms of thinking of data as a strategic asset and resource to help us make better decisions with higher confidence, with higher accuracy, and basically become forward-looking instead of being reactive. So those things are coming together. And so to be an effective data scientist or analyst, or in this data analytics profession, we have to think about the big picture. So that's why technical skills is a must-have, kind of like table stake. You have to have that. But having that is not enough. You have to really go above and beyond.
Those are incredibly good points. And I think, Joe, you probably invited the wrong guy to give this presentation, because I think that description nailed it exactly. Now, some of that stuff I'm going to touch on going forward. I think the other great point brought up there is the overall structure of the organization, which I don't touch on here, but that can be a hurdle as well. That if you're embedded within marketing, very difficult to come up with an objective, what's viewed as an objective view of what's going on in the business. Joe, you and I have seen that in a past life, in that you're seeing, yes, maybe it's tactical, but also as perhaps biased, right? In that you're sitting within one part of the organization, but measuring effectiveness and providing insight to other parts of the organization, and it may not come off as unbiased as analytics actually is. Those are great points. Thanks, Gary, for bringing those up. And that segues well into what we're going to get into in a couple slides, and actually touches on it here. So just a few minutes. I know we're
hey, wait,
the original plan.
Hey, Ken, I thought I heard one more question just before
yeah.
you're on this.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you for Gary's comments, and hi, Joseph. I just want to add some comments for the last questions, because I used to be a business development associate in a small company, a startup, and also at that time I also was doing some data analytics work, and I find that when after I doing some data analytics for my clients' profile analysis, sometimes I find our clients maybe not a potential clients for us to keep moving forward with them. But when the decision maker, the group leader of our department said we have to continue to do this, because sometimes we don't have a clear decision to be made by us after our data analytics. And some people, like some unstable elements cannot be used in our data modeling. But in the end, some customers or the clients could be a potential clients for us. So that's maybe sometimes an obstacle for our data analysis work.
Yeah, that's another great point, another good segue to some of the discussion that we'll have around the two-way relationship between analytics and the rest of the business, because that can be a big impediment. And I always struggle with how much of that is our problem to solve as an analytics organization, and how much of that is the rest of the organization's problem to solve as partners. And I think the reality is it's both. And it's just a matter of how do we get the right leadership together and the right processes together to make sure we're all pointed to the same end goal. Because when you have those conversations, there's rarely disagreement as to what the end state should look like. It's always about the process of getting there, and about who's responsible for what, or who's accountable for making sure those conversations happen. And to Gary's point earlier, that if you don't bring analytics in early, no one thinks that's a good idea, but it doesn't happen often, or at least it happens too infrequently. Is that because the analysts aren't raising their hands enough, or the analytics organization isn't raising their hands enough? Or is it because the rest of the organization is not thinking, I need to bring my analytics partner into this? It's probably a combination of both, but no one disagrees with what the end goal is. So it's one of those challenges that seems imminently solvable, but seems like a constant struggle. And I've been doing this for 20 years and I still haven't figured it out yet. So still working on it. I'll get there before I retire. I'm sure of that. So along those lines, just a quick question for you, Joe, though. I know we're right at 5 o'clock. What do we have, 15 minutes left? I don't know what how much do you want me to push?
Let's try to see if we can wrap this up, your section up in like 10 minutes, and then maybe 5 minutes at the end for the announcements or something. I think there's getting a lot of value out of this, so I don't want to like cut it right away. But yeah, let's try not to go over too much.
Yeah, it's fine. So let me just touch on a couple of these things here. So I've led a few different analytics organizations in my career, and I've structured them all a bit differently. And with varying levels of success. And typically what happens is it works for certain teams that you're supporting, or certain clients that you're supporting, but it's not quite appropriate for other clients. But the key around structure for me is it doesn't need to be either functionally focused or focused on business units you're supported. I don't think you need to structure it in any kind of rigid way. across all of your different opportunities, all your different clients or business partners, but it needs to be able to, in a frictionless way, work with those clients and work with those business units. So sometimes that means you structure it exactly the same as your business units. You have a marketing analytics group, and you have a sales analytics group, and you have a merchandising analytics group. It might not need to be that rigid, but it needs to be able to fit within that support structure in a frictionless way. And there's a variety of ways to do that. Being nimble and scalable, that's all about, from an analytics standpoint, there's an ebb and flow to the work of every function within the company. The challenge with analytics is we're supporting multiple different parts of the company, multiple different clients. So we are the victim of the ebb and flow that's going on everywhere, right? Which makes it very difficult to predict what the needs are going to be and where we need to scale up resources, where we need to scale down resources. So my guidance here, and my process here is always control the controllable, and making sure we're predicting needs where that is predictable, and it's adjusting to everything else, right? But if you can control the controllable and figure out what is predictable, what is not, it's a little less overwhelming than trying to control everything because you're gonna have last minute things that come up, that just happens. Putting multiple eggs in each basket, what I mean by that is, and this is really about transition planning and dealing with resources that go on vacation or they leave the organization. I don't find that the challenge tends to be transitioning the functional requirements. It's transitioning the business knowledge. And as analysts, we tend to be very good at documenting code and what we did for a particular analysis. We're not as good at documenting the knowledge transfer process, or what you need to know in order to do that well. So I look for ways to systemize that within the organization, because I don't think that comes naturally to us. It doesn't come naturally to me. I don't think it comes naturally to most of the teams that I've led. So we really need to systemize that. And then what I mean by unnatural osmosis, natural osmosis is going to happen anyway, right? You bring an analyst into a conversation, he or she is going to naturally get to know the business and the objectives and the particulars of that business and all that nuance. But they're only going to understand they're only going to absorb what they're exposed to. So how can we find more ways to expose analysts to all parts of the business, so that he or she, even if they don't need to know that today, they'll be ready for that type of work down the road. So both Gary and Yating, I may be pronouncing your name wrong. If so, I apologize. You brought up some key points here on what I call the two-way engagement process. So this is how does analytics engage with the rest of the organization? And this could be a conversation that I would have both with my team as well as with other teams, because the responsibility is absolutely two-way here. The one area that we talked earlier that you mentioned, Gary, is engaging analytics staff early and often. I think that's partly on us to poke our nose into situations that maybe we haven't been invited to, but it's also on our business partners to remember to bring in the analytics people early in the process. Clearly defining the roles, I see that as an accountability thing, that we want an open dialogue of accountability. We want our business partners to hold us accountable for what we promise to do. And we want to be able to hold the business partners accountable for what they promise to do. But in order to do that, we need to be clear about who's responsible for what. Thinking 2 steps ahead, again, that's just about planning and making sure that we're not just figuring out what we need to do this week as an organization, both analytics and elsewhere, but what do we think we're gonna need a month from now, next quarter, next year. And then don't apologize for leaving your lane. That's, again, a two-way thing. I think for analysts, when you're involved in the discovery process or the strategy development process, and you hear the conversation going in a way that is not supported by some of the work that we've done, raise your hand, be vocal, and say, guys, that idea might sound good on the surface, but we've done this analysis that suggests that might not be the best way to go. And for our business partners, I always encourage them to challenge the work that we do. It's very rare that there's one perfect type of analysis that's going to solve a specific problem. There are always options, right? So we need to expose those options and the trade-offs of those options to our business partners so that they can challenge them, right? Because sometimes the most precise model may take X number of weeks to create. Well, how important is precision versus getting something out the door. We need to balance those two competing needs. All right, analytics skill sets. Gary, you touched on consultants. So these 5 areas will probably describe 99% of analysts out there. You're either an analyst or a statistician or a BI developer or data engineer or consultant. You might be some combination of several of these, but this probably at least loosely describes what you do. But when I think about how to structure a team and what's truly needed, there's some other factors that come into that. So you need to understand how data savvy are our business partners. How best do they consume data? If you're with an agency, how data savvy are your internal partners in terms of the account teams and strategy teams? That's going to drive, in some ways, the mix of resources. So you may need more consultants if your clients are not necessarily data savvy, because they can't do that work. They need not only the analysis, but they need that full translation layer, to figure out what to do with this data. If you're with a very data savvy client or a very data savvy business partner, they can shoulder some of that load. So you may focus more on getting hands on keyboard and building out models and building out segmentation schemes and relying on your partners to do some of that translation. But it matters, right? It matters who those people are and what their skill sets are. And one thing that I like to think of this as, and I mentioned this earlier, is that emotional intelligence can be as or more important than technical competence, right? So we absolutely need the technical competence. That is just table stakes. We need to have that, but we need to have the right skill sets to translate that into the business. So I want to introduce the concept of the marketing scientist, and this is something that one of my current business partners, this is what he calls it, and so I've sort of stolen it from him because I love the term, and I love the application of it. And this is not necessarily a new invention, but it's a way to describe it that I think gets to some of the consultative mindset that Gary touched on earlier and that we were discussing throughout this is, and it could be a marketing scientist. If you're not supporting the marketing organization, it might be a sales scientist, could be a product, could be a merchandising scientist. But the goal of this individual or this function is to be the connective tissue between what the analytics team is doing, how that relates to the business strategy, and then how that manifests itself through implementation. So this doesn't necessarily need to be an individual person. It can be more of a mindset, right? So you may not have somebody who you call the marketing scientist, but you need resources within your team that can figure out how to bring those 3 pieces together. So yes, they understand the data science side, but they also understand the business and how marketers or sales leadership thinks about data and thinks about insight, and what language they need to be spoken in from a data standpoint in order to understand it. And you need to have at least some working knowledge of the implementation. And implementation, think of that as operational implementation. That I've seen a lot of segmentation schemes that are very pretty in the deck that's presented, but when it gets in front of the creative team and the marketing operations team, they look at it and say, there's no way we can execute this with the tools that we have. That's a huge miss. So yes, we need to be analytically rigorous in what we do, but we also need to think about the downstream impacts of that and how is that going to manifest itself? And again, this individual or this skill set needs to be involved throughout the process. All right, so as we wrap up here, let's talk about some of the common pitfalls. This first one, and Joe, I've probably said this to you in the past, in prior lives we worked together, which annoys my team every time, but it's that analytics has no value on its own, right? A model or a segmentation that's not tied to a strategy or to the operational realities of a business is never going to make its way into the business and is never going to have an impact. So when we think about the solutions we're developing, it's why that upfront discovery is so critical. And that if we don't understand exactly what we're trying to solve for and exactly what the operational challenges are, the operational constraints are within the organization, we may end up with something that looks great from an academic standpoint, but actually doesn't impact the business. Analysis doesn't care what you thought was true. Now, this is a message I give more externally to the analytics team than internally. And the whole idea is we have to avoid confirmation bias. So we all go into an analysis thinking, well, I believe this to be true, and we tend to embrace analysis that confirms it and discount analysis that that refutes it. The idea behind analysis is to be as objective as possible. So we need to constantly encourage our business partners to look at what the analysis has found rather than how well it aligns with what they originally thought. This is another pet peeve of mine. Why is there always time to fix it, but there's never enough time to do it right in the first place? So I think we've all been in situations where we build an analysis and then it's due on Friday, so we deliver it on Friday, and then the next 2 weeks, we spend time redoing it, right? So Friday was this very firm deadline apparently, but we always managed to find time within the organization to either fix errors or more commonly, realign the analysis to support the business needs. My view on this is, let's use that extra time that we know exists in most cases and use that up front during the discovery process so that we, A, don't make mistakes, but more importantly, the analysis fits the true objectives of the business. Unfocused curiosity can be an expensive distraction. This is another message I give to my business partners often, in that when you're doing a midstream review of what we found so far, it always raises a bunch of, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? And those are all good questions and probably worthwhile questions, but some work and conversation needs to happen to ensure that those questions are actually going to lead to an actionable outcome. Otherwise, we end up spinning our wheels and the analysis process never actually ends. And then from a modeling standpoint, models tend to be built for a specific use case. Sometimes they're applicable to other use cases. A lot of times they're not. This comes down to, again, the early stages of the conversation. What are we solving for? What are we not solving for? And the way that I try to frame it so people get motivated about it is, what are we solving for today? And what do we intend to solve for down the road? So it's more of a positive spin on it, that it's not a, yes, we're going to do this. No, we're not going to do this. It's, yes, we're going to do this today. Yes, we're going to do these other things, but that's going to be down the road. All right, so last slide. 3 takeaways for different parts of the organization, from my standpoint at least. So if you lead an analytics organization or you're part of one, here are the 3 things that I would just put in your head on a daily basis to make sure that you're supporting the business appropriately. First, it's, and we talked about this before, insist on having a seat at the table and make sure it's for the full meal, right? Measurement is the dessert. That's not the full meal. Discovery is the appetizer. We need to be involved with the appetizer, the side dishes, the main entree, and the dessert for us to do our job effectively. Providing options to a partner. Like I said earlier, there's rarely one way to do an analysis. There are trade-offs along the way, and we need to partner with our business partners to make sure that we're making the right decision as to how to approach it. And then again, aligning your structure to meet the needs of the business. For those outside of analytics, it's bringing people in earlier, bringing your analytic partner in earlier, and whatever you think is the right time, it probably is a week before that, right? So earlier is better. Figure out how to balance urgency, and curiosity with quality and actionability. Those are very different things, and they're not always aligned. And then this is for both of us, both analytics and elsewhere. Our partners should challenge the findings and the rationale of what we came up with. And we should welcome that, right? If we're not welcome to that, then you will have a natural conflict within what we're doing and what the organization wants. And ultimately, we're not trying to get everyone on the same page in terms of what's the right way, what's the wrong way. We're just trying to surface all the challenges, all the disagreements, so that ultimately, whatever we decide, we're all on the same page as to what it was decided, why it was decided, even if we don't all agree with it. And that's all I got. Any other thoughts, questions?
Great, thank you, Ken. This is great discussion. Good presentation.
Thanks, Garrett. I appreciate your feedback throughout. I think that was really valuable to frame some of these things probably in a better way than I framed them. So thank you very much for that.
So sometimes people ask me or I expect yes or no answer or right or wrong answer. I said, it depends.
Right.
There is no correct answer. There's a lot of gray area. And how do you understand the nuances?
That could be its own presentation. Is just that topic alone. Completely agree, because there's multiple ways to attack a problem, and it's typically not binary, and the answer is not always binary. There's a lot of, well, it depends, and how much time do you have, and sometimes it's how much budget do you have, and how important is precision versus speed. There's so many different trade-offs, and I think that gets lost sometimes, both within analytics and elsewhere, because of the urgency to get stuff done.
You're trying not to be evasive, but rather to be honest, and that provide maybe 2 or 3 options, not only one, right? If you give them 10 options, it's too many.
Exactly. Yeah, you can definitely go too far in that direction.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Joe, I will turn it back to you, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right. Thank you, Ken. I really appreciate that. I think there was a lot of value and a lot of generated discussion. I was glad to hear that. People seem to really get a lot out of it. So I just want to finish up quickly here. We're a little over time. We tend to do that because we get talking. So this last section was just some announcements to make. And what I'd like to say is that we only have 2 job opportunities this time. And I'll run through those. But before I do, we can leave this up. That's fine. This page is good. I want to make a mention that FocusKPI is really beginning to ramp up their talent database. And we'd like some job descriptions. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to work with some of our members, and we want to offer this service to them, that if you give us job descriptions, we will match it against our jobs in our resources in our database, and we'll show you what we find. And you can take it from there. And it's all on us, so that it's part of the benefits of being a member of the community. And the more that you can give us, the more that we can refine our database, and the better we can target for you. We do target by skill set and geographic area and things like that. We talked a little bit about it last week or last forum. But I just, again, wanted to say, if you have any resumes, we'd love to put those in our database. And certainly if you have job descriptions, come forward and let's work with you. I'm sure that we can find some resources that would fit you. And we'd love to just help you out. We'd love to just see how we can give this benefit to you. So please contact either myself or Lynn if you have any questions on that. So our 2 jobs today, the first one that we have is a marketing analyst. And this one is based out in San Francisco, full-time contract position. And it's really an analyst level. 2 to 3 years experience in analytics, 1 or 2 years in web analytics or email marketing, and just being able to, learn and work with data, work with analytics, having the background of an advanced degree in the quantitative discipline, statistics, economics, something like that. Our second job that we have that I want to mention is in Boston. It's a database operations intern. And you heard me just mention our talent database, and we're looking for some more resources to help us keep this efficient, really. So again, we need some degree in statistics or math. We really want to be look for people that have an analytics background. It will be remote. And it's a great experience for an intern. We work a lot with mentoring our interns. I had an intern at Staples that actually turned into a permanent position. So we really try to grow these positions and give skill sets that will be useful to those new graduates or those looking at interns. In that regard, I will also say that we have twice a week, 2 o'clock on Tuesdays, 5 o'clock on Fridays. We have a career chat. Feel free to join those as well. Those are on our website. Before we go here, is there any announcements other than that? Does anyone have any final questions? Okay, wonderful. Well, then I want to thank you all for coming. I hope you got a lot out of this. It seemed like there was some good discussion. I'm really excited by that. Please feel free to follow up. Job descriptions, resumes, questions on the presentations, come directly to me, or seek out Lynn or Carol or any one of us at FocusKPI. Thank you all, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks.
Thank you, Joseph. Bye.
Thank you.